This is the moment a millionaire's life ended in 48 hours. Security cameras caught everything. The slap, the fall, his pregnant wife bleeding on the floor, 15 witnesses, 4 cameras, millions of views. But here's what he didn't know: her father owns every hospital his company needs to survive. What happens next isn't just revenge. It's total annihilation. Before we begin, hit that like button if you believe in real justice. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe because stories like this need to be heard. Trust me, you won't believe how this ends. The courtroom showdown. Absolutely brutal. Let's get into it. This is the moment that destroyed a millionaire's empire in 48 hours. What you're about to see happened in front of 15 witnesses, was caught on 4 cameras, and the victim, she's carrying his child. But here's what he didn't know. Her father owns every hospital his company depends on. This isn't just revenge. This is total annihilation. The waiting room of Brookline Medical Dental smelled like meat and fear. Claire Bennett sat in the corner chair, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching her purse like a lifeline. 8 months pregnant. Her face was pale but composed. It was supposed to be a routine cleaning. Nothing more? The receptionist smiled at her. "Mrs. Ashford, I see you canceled the teeth whitening appointment. Was there a problem?" Claire shook her head gently. "My doctor said the chemicals aren't safe during pregnancy. I didn't want to risk it." The receptionist nodded. "Of course. Safety first. We'll just do the cleaning today." That's when the door burst open. Derek Ashford strode in wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His jaw was tight. His eyes were cold. Even before he spoke, the temperature in the room dropped. "What the hell is this?" He held up his phone, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You canceled the whitening without telling me." Claire stood slowly, startled but trying to stay calm. "Derek, the doctor said it wasn't safe for the baby. The chemicals could." "The baby," Derek scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've been using that excuse for months. Do you even realize how ridiculous you sound? The Forbes Gala is in 5 days. My wife can't show up with yellow teeth." 3 patients in the waiting room exchanged uncomfortable glances. One older woman clutched her handbag tighter. The receptionist's fingers hovered over the phone. Claire felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She could feel the baby shift inside her, startled by the sound of his voice. "Derek, please," she whispered. "Can we talk outside? People are what?" He stepped closer, towering over her. "People are watching you embarrass me again, like you always do." Dr. Helen Crawford appeared at the doorway in her white coat, sensing trouble. "Mr. Ashford, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. This is a medical facility." Derek ignored her completely. His face was red now, a vein pulsing at his temple. "I'm tired of you making decisions without consulting me," he hissed at Claire. "I'm tired of you acting like you know better. I'm tired of you embarrassing me in front of—" Before anyone could react, his hand shot forward. The crack of his palm against Claire's face shattered the silence like a gunshot. Her head snapped to the side. She lost her balance, stumbled backward, and fell hard against the corner of the metal instrument tray. The taste of blood filled her mouth instantly. Pain exploded across her cheekbone and rippled down her spine. She reached instinctively for her belly. The baby kicked once, hard, frantic. A collective gasp erupted through the room. "Sir, stop!" Nurse Williams screamed, running forward. Claire lay half-curled on the floor, dazed. Everything felt distant and muffled, like she was underwater. She could see mouths moving, but couldn't process the words. Dr. Crawford dropped to her knees beside Claire. "Don't move. Stay still. Someone call 911 right now." Derek stood motionless for 3 seconds. That felt like an eternity. His hand was still raised slightly, trembling. His eyes flickered with something. Not remorse. Realization. He'd done this in public. His voice came out low and defensive. "She's overreacting. It wasn't that hard. She's being dramatic." Crawford's voice turned to ice. "Mr. Ashford, you need to leave this building immediately before I have you forcibly removed." "I'm her husband," Derek snapped. "This is between us." "No, Dr. Crawford said firmly. "This is assault. You need to step back right now." The receptionist was already on the phone with emergency services. Her voice shook as she gave the address. Nurse Williams knelt beside Claire with a clean towel, pressing it gently to her mouth where a small cut had opened on her lip. "Stay with me, Mrs. Ashford," the nurse murmured. "Tell me if you feel dizzy or if anything hurts besides your face." Claire tried to speak, but only a broken whisper came out. "My baby. Please check my baby." Dart Crawford's expression softened. "We will, I promise. Just breathe slowly for me." The clinic had turned into chaos. One patient stood by the window, phone raised, recording everything. Another woman was crying quietly in her seat. An elderly man had his arm around his wife, both staring in horror. Derek rubbed his forehead, his voice shaking now, not with remorse, with anger. "This is absurd," he said through clenched teeth. "You people don't understand. She's been impossible lately. Hormones make her." "Sir," the receptionist said, her voice trembling but firm, "the police are on their way. I suggest you leave before they arrive." That's when Derek realized the walls were closing in. He straightened his jacket, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "You're all making a mistake. A huge mistake." Then he turned sharply and walked out. The door slammed behind him, leaving only the faint jingle of the bell and the smell of his expensive cologne. For several seconds, no one spoke. Only the hum of the air conditioner and Claire's shallow breathing filled the room. Crawford placed her stethoscope against Claire's belly. "Heartbeat is fast but steady. We'll monitor everything until the paramedics arrive." Claire stared blankly at the ceiling tiles above her. Tears spilled from the corners of her eyes, not from physical pain, but from something deeper. Humiliation, disbelief, terror. She had seen flashes of his temper before. The way he'd grab her arm too hard when he was frustrated. The way he'd raise his voice when she questioned his decisions. But never this. Never in public. Never with their child's life at stake. When the sirens wailed outside, growing closer, Claire closed her eyes. She whispered to herself, barely audible. Everyone saw, everyone knows. But what she didn't know yet was that this moment, this single act of violence, had just set something far greater in motion. The sound of that slap would echo through boardrooms, courtrooms, and newsrooms before the story was over, and the man who threw it had no idea what was coming for him. The ambulance ride to Whitmore Medical Center felt like it lasted hours, though it was only 12 minutes. Claire lay on the stretcher, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic beep of the fetal monitor. The paramedic, a young woman with kind eyes, kept checking the readings. "Baby's heart rate is elevated but stable. How are you feeling, Mrs. Ashford?" Claire's voice came out flat. "I don't know, numb." The paramedic hesitated, then asked gently, "Do you feel safe going home tonight?" Claire's throat tightened. That was the question, wasn't it? The one that made everything real. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she whispered. "Everything's in his name. The apartment, the bank accounts. Even my car is registered to him." The paramedic's expression softened with understanding. She'd seen this before, too many times. "We're taking you to Whitmore Medical Center," she said quietly. "Your father's already been notified. He'll be waiting." Claire closed her eyes. Her father, the one person Derek had always been careful around. The one relationship he couldn't control. The ambulance pulled into the emergency bay. The doors flew open, and there he was. William Bennett stood at the entrance, still in his white coat from rounds. His silver hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. When he saw her face, swollen and bruised, his entire body went rigid. "Dad," Claire whispered as they wheeled her past him. His hand found hers immediately. His grip was steady, but she could feel the tremor of rage beneath the surface. "Don't talk," he said softly. "You're safe now." They moved her into a private examination room. Dr. Robert Matthews, the hospital's chief of obstetrics, was already waiting. He was one of William's oldest friends. "Let's get a full workup," Dr. Matthews said calmly. "Ultrasound, blood pressure, complete physical. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." As the nurses moved around her efficiently, Claire caught sight of herself in the metal reflection of a cabinet door. Her left cheek was swollen, turning a deep purple. There was dried blood at the corner of her mouth. She looked away quickly. William stood against the wall, arms crossed, watching every move the medical staff made. His face was a mask of professional composure, but Claire knew him too well. She could see the fury burning behind his eyes. Dr. Matthews finished the ultrasound and turned the screen toward Claire. Baby looks good, strong heartbeat, no signs of distress now that your adrenaline is settling. Claire let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Thank you, she whispered. After the examination, when it was just Claire and her father in the room, the silence stretched between them. William pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down heavily. For a long moment, he just looked at her, really looked at her, not as a doctor assessing injuries, but as a father seeing his daughter broken. How long, he asked quietly. Claire knew what he meant. How long has he been like this? William nodded. She swallowed hard. It started small. About a year after we got married, he'd grab my arm too hard when he was angry. Leave bruises. He always apologized after, said he was under stress. The company was expanding so fast, and he had so much pressure. Her voice cracked. I made excuses for him. I thought if I just tried harder, if I didn't push his buttons, it would get better. William's jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Today was the first time he ever hit me, Claire continued. But it wasn't the first time I was scared of him. William stood abruptly and walked to the window. He stared out at the city for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, too controlled. I'm calling our lawyers. Today. Right now. Dad, I can't afford, he turned sharply. Afford Claire. I own this hospital. I know every judge in Boston. And that man's company, 70% of his revenue comes from my contracts. He just made the biggest mistake of his life. For the first time since the clinic, Claire felt a spark of something. Not quite hope, but maybe the possibility of it. You really think we can win? She asked. William's expression was granite. Sweetheart, he won't know what hit him. A knock interrupted them. A police officer stepped in. Officer Davis, according to his name tag. Mrs. Ashford, I need to take your statement about what happened today. Claire nodded and began to recount everything. The officer wrote it all down, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. The clinic has the security footage, Officer Davis said, and we have statements from 4 witnesses, including Dr. Crawford. This is a solid case. Will he be arrested? William asked. We'll be issuing a warrant, Officer Davis confirmed. He'll likely be processed and released on bail, but there will be charges, assault and battery at minimum. After the officer left, Claire's mother, Grace, arrived. She rushed to the bedside, her eyes red from crying. Oh, sweetheart, Grace whispered, carefully hugging her daughter. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. They sat together in silence for a while. The beeping of the monitors, the distant sounds of the hospital, the weight of everything that had just changed. Claire's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I'm sorry, I love you. Please don't do this. Her hands started shaking. Grace took the phone gently and read the message. Block him, William said immediately. Block every method he has to contact you. But even as Grace helped her do that, Claire felt the walls closing in. Where would she go? What would she do? She hadn't worked in 2 years because Derek insisted she focus on preparing for motherhood. She had no income, no savings in her name, no car, no apartment. She was 8 months pregnant and completely dependent on a man who had just shown the world exactly what he was capable of. I feel so stupid, Claire whispered. Everyone's going to ask why I didn't leave sooner, why I married him, why I barfed him when Noah. Stop, Grace said firmly. You are not stupid. You are a victim of abuse, and anyone who blames you for his actions can go straight to hell. William sat back down. You're going to stay with us, in your old room, for as long as you need. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. And Claire, William's voice was steel. He's not getting away with this. I promise you that. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel safe. But as she lay there in that hospital bed, feeling her daughter kick against her ribs, all she could think was, what if powerful fathers and good lawyers aren't enough? What if Derek finds a way to take even this child from her? The thought was so terrifying, she couldn't breathe. 24 hours later, the video was everywhere. Claire woke up in her childhood bedroom to the sound of her phone exploding with notifications. Grace had set up the room exactly as it had been when Claire left for college. Pale blue walls, white furniture, photos of high school friends still tucked into the mirror frame. It felt surreal, like stepping backward in time. She picked up her phone and immediately wished she hadn't. The video had been posted to social media by one of the patients in the waiting room. The caption read, "Millionaire tech CEO caught on camera assaulting his pregnant wife at a dental clinic. This is what abuse looks like." Claire watched with numb horror as the clip played. The sound quality was surprisingly clear. You could hear Derek's voice rising. See his hand connect with her face. Watch her fall. The video had 2 million views. 2 million people had watched the worst moment of her life. The comments section was a battlefield. "He needs to be in jail, not just arrested. How could anyone hit a pregnant woman, monster? She probably provoked him. We don't know the full story. Gold digger got what she deserved. Why didn't she leave him before this?" Claire felt bile rise in her throat. She dropped the phone and ran to the bathroom. Grace found her there 20 minutes later, sitting on the floor with her back against the bathtub. "You saw it," Grace said quietly. It wasn't a question. Claire nodded. "Everyone's seen it. The whole world just watched me get hit and fall on the floor, like..." Her voice broke. Grace sat down beside her on the cold tile. "The lawyer your father hired is named Rebecca Stone. She's already filed for an emergency restraining order. Derek can't come within 500 feet of you." "What about when the baby's born?" Claire whispered. "He's her father. Courts care about fathers' rights." Grace's expression tightened. "We'll deal with that when we get there." Downstairs, William was on the phone in his study. His voice carried up through the vents. "I want every contract with MedSync Systems suspended immediately. Send formal notice to all 12 hospitals in our network. Effective today." Claire heard someone respond on the other end, too muffled to make out. "I don't care about the financial implications," William said sharply. "That man assaulted my daughter on camera. I will not have our hospital network associated with his company for one more day." There was a pause. "If he wants to sue for breach of contract, let him try. We'll see how that plays in court when the jury watches the video." By noon, the news had picked it up. Local stations, then regional. By evening, national networks were running the story. Breaking tonight, tech executive Derek Ashford, founder and CEO of MedSync Systems, has been arrested following a viral video showing him striking his pregnant wife at a medical clinic. The victim is reportedly the daughter of prominent hospital executive William Bennett. They showed clips of Derek being led out of his penthouse in handcuffs that morning. He'd posted bail within 2 hours. Then they cut to a statement from Derek's lawyer, Marcus Wright. "My client deeply regrets the incident and takes full responsibility for his actions. He was under extreme stress related to business pressures and personal concerns about his unborn child's health. He has voluntarily checked himself into a wellness facility for intensive therapy and anger management." Claire watched the screen in disbelief. "Wellness facility," she said aloud. "He's spinning this like he's the victim." Rebecca Stone arrived at the Bennett house that evening. She was a sharp woman in her mid-30s with short dark hair and intelligent eyes. She sat across from Claire at the dining room table, a folder of documents spread between them. "The restraining order was granted," Rebecca said. "He cannot contact you in any way. No calls, texts, emails, or third-party messages. He can't come to this house or the hospital." "What about custody?" Claire asked. "When she's born, can he..." Rebecca held up a hand and "Let's take this one step at a time, but right now you're still pregnant. He has no parental rights until the child is born. After that, we'll file for full custody based on the assault and his history of controlling behavior." "Will we win?" Rebecca's expression was carefully neutral. "The video helps. The police report helps. Witness statements help. But Claire, I need you to understand something. Derek has resources. He can afford the best lawyers money can buy. This is going to be a fight." Claire felt the spark of hope from yesterday start to flicker out. "He's already trying to control the narrative," Rebecca continued. "The wellness facility story, the public apology. He's setting himself up as a man who made a mistake and is getting help. Judges like rehabilitation narratives." "So what do I do?" Claire asked. "You stay quiet. Don't respond to media. Don't post on social media. Don't engage with anyone who contacts you. Let me and your father handle the legal and public relations side. You focus on staying healthy for your baby." That night, Claire lay in bed scrolling through more comments on the video. Most were supportive, but the cruel ones stuck in her mind like thorns. She married him for his money, obviously. Bet she's lying about being abused before this. Women like her destroy men's lives for attention. She turned off her phone and stared at the ceiling. In the darkness, she felt her daughter move, a gentle roll, like a magnet. Claire put her hand on her belly. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I'm trying to protect you. I promise." But deep down, a terrible fear was growing. What if trying wasn't enough? 1 week after the assault, Derek made his move. Claire was in the kitchen with her mother, trying to force down breakfast. When her phone rang, Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. "Turn on the news," Rebecca said without preamble. "Channel 7, now." Grace grabbed the remote and switched on the television. Derek's face filled the screen. He was sitting in what looked like a therapy office, dressed casually in a sweater, looking humble and remorseful. The interviewer, a sympathetic-looking woman, asked gentle questions. "Derek, thank you for speaking with us. I know this has been an incredibly difficult time." Derek nodded, his expression pained. "It has, but nothing compared to what my wife is going through. I failed her. I failed our unborn child. And I have to live with that every day." Claire felt her stomach turn. "You've checked yourself into treatment," the interviewer continued. "Can you tell us about that?" "I'm in intensive therapy," Derek said, "working through anger issues, stress management, communication skills. I'm also attending support groups for men who've committed domestic violence. I want to be better. I have to be better. For my daughter." The interviewer leaned forward. "What would you say to Claire if she's watching?" Derek looked directly into the camera, his eyes glistening. "I love you. I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for the chance to prove I can change. For our family." The segment ended with a voiceover. Derek Ashford has also announced a $5 million donation to domestic violence prevention programs and has stepped down as CEO of MedSync Systems to focus on his recovery. Claire stared at the screen in stunned silence. Grace turned off the television. "That manipulative son of a—" The doorbell rang. William answered it. A moment later, he appeared in the kitchen doorway holding a stack of legal documents, his face pale. "He's filing for emergency custody," William said quietly. Rebecca arrived 30 minutes later and spread the documents on the table. "He's arguing that you're emotionally unstable," she explained, "that you've been using your father's influence to alienate him from his child. He's requesting supervised visitation rights immediately after birth and joint custody pending full hearing." "On what grounds?" Grace demanded. Rebecca flipped to a page. "He's claiming you have a history of instability, that you were depressed during the pregnancy, that you've made threats to keep him from the baby." "That's a lie," Claire said. "All of it. I know. But he has a psychologist willing to testify that his behavior was an isolated incident caused by extreme stress and that he's now actively in treatment. Meanwhile, he's painting you as vindictive." William leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "What do? We fight," Rebecca said. "But Claire, they're going to require you to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, court-appointed, to determine your fitness as a parent." Claire felt the room tilt slightly. "They want to evaluate me. I'm not the one who committed assault." "I know, but this is how it works. He's the one in therapy, showing remorse, making public gestures. You're the one who's gone silent. In family court, optics matter." "This is insane," Grace said. Rebecca's expression was grim. "It's strategy, and it's effective." The evaluation was scheduled for 3 days later. Claire sat in Dr. Patricia Monroe's office, a sterile space with beige walls and uncomfortable chairs. Dr. Monroe was a thin woman with steel gray hair and cold eyes. "Mrs. Ashford, thank you for coming." "I didn't have a choice," Claire said quietly. Dr. Monroe didn't smile. "Let's begin. Would you describe yourself as an anxious person?" "Sometimes. Doesn't everyone feel anxious occasionally? Have you ever had thoughts of harming yourself or others?" No. Your husband claims you frequently have emotional outbursts. Is that accurate? Claire bristled. My husband hit me in public. I think my emotions are pretty reasonable. Dr. Monroe made a note. So you would say you're angry? Wouldn't you be? I'm asking about you, not me. The questions continued, each one feeling like a trap. Do you agree that you married primarily for financial security? No, I married him because I loved him. But you acknowledge that his wealth was a factor. It wasn't the reason. That's not what I asked. By the end of the hour, Claire felt wrung out. Dr. Monroe walked her to the door. I'll have my report ready for the court within a week. Claire met Rebecca outside the building. How did it go? Rebecca asked. I don't know. She made every answer sound wrong. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression darkened. What? Claire asked. Social media. There are rumors circulating that you had an affair. What? That's completely, I know, but someone leaked text messages. Taken out of context. Messages between you and a male colleague from 2 years ago. Claire's mind raced. You mean James from the hospital fundraiser committee? We were planning the charity auction. Doesn't matter. They're being spun as flirtatious. Claire felt something inside her crack. She'd done everything right. Left him. Got a restraining order. Stayed quiet like she was told. And somehow, she was still losing. That night, she sat in her room, door locked, and let herself cry for the first time since the assault. Not quiet tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she'd been holding closed for months. When Grace knocked on the door, Claire didn't answer. Sweetheart, please let me in. I can't do this, Claire said through the door. Everyone thinks I'm lying. They think I provoked him. They think I'm trying to steal his money and his baby. No matter what I do, I'm the villain. You're not, Grace said firmly. You're surviving. But survival wasn't enough. Not when the man who hurt her was winning the public's sympathy. Not when a court-appointed psychologist was writing a report that could take her child away. Not when every truth she told was being twisted into a lie. Claire looked at her reflection in the mirror. Swollen face, hollow eyes, a body that didn't feel like hers anymore. She whispered to her reflection, how does anyone survive this? There was no answer. The psychiatric report arrived 1 week later. Claire sat at the dining room table while Rebecca read it aloud, her voice carefully neutral. Patricia Monroe concludes that Claire Bennett Ashford exhibits signs of dependent personality disorder, heightened emotional reactivity consistent with vindictive behavior, and difficulty accepting responsibility for relationship failures. William slammed his hand on the table. That's complete fabrication. Rebecca continued reading. The report recommends supervised visitation only for Mrs. Ashford, with primary custody granted to Mr. Ashford pending completion of his treatment program. The words hit Claire like physical blows. Primary custody. To Derek. To the man who hit her. They can't actually believe this, Grace said. Rebecca set down the report. In family court, a licensed psychiatrist's evaluation carries significant weight, especially when the father is demonstrating active rehabilitation and the mother appears, on paper, to be emotionally unstable. I'm not unstable, Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared. There's a difference. I know that, but we have to prove it. William stood and paced to the window. What are our options? We can request a second evaluation from our own psychologist, but that looks defensive. We can challenge Dr. Monroe's credentials or bias, but without proof of misconduct, it won't stick. Rebecca paused. Or we can find something that changes the entire narrative. Like what? Claire asked. Something that proves Derek's rehabilitation is performative. Something that shows his true character. William turned from the window. I'll make some calls. Over the next 3 days, William used every connection he had. Private investigators, former MedSync employees, business associates who'd felt wronged by Derek. What they found was worse than anyone expected. On the 4th day, Rebecca returned to the house with a woman Claire had never met. Claire, this is Sarah Mitchell. She worked at MedSync for 4 years as a data analyst. And Sarah was young, maybe 26, with nervous hands and tired eyes. I need to show you something, Sarah said, placing a USB drive on the table. But first, you should know that if this gets out, I'll probably never work in tech again. Derek made sure of that. William inserted the drive into his laptop. What appeared on screen made Claire's blood run cold. Internal emails, data logs, financial records. Derek's been violating HIPAA for 3 years, Sarah explained. MedSync's software has a back door. It collects patient data from hospital systems and sells it to pharmaceutical companies and insurance providers. Millions of records. I flagged it to management twice. Derek threatened to blacklist me from the entire industry if I went public. Rebecca leaned forward. Why are you coming forward now? Sarah's voice shook. Because I saw the video. I watched him hit you while you were pregnant, and I realized that I've been protecting a criminal to save my own career. What does that make me? She pulled out more documents. These are financial records showing offshore accounts, payments from insurance companies, patient data sold without consent, falsified compliance reports to federal regulators. William scrolled through the evidence, his expression growing darker. This isn't just civil litigation, he said. This is federal crimes, FBI jurisdiction. Rebecca was already on her phone. I'm calling the USAM attorney's office. If we can prove criminal activity, it undermines everything Derek's been saying about rehabilitation and being a good father. But before she could dial, Claire's phone rang. Unknown number. Against her better judgment. She answered. Claire. Derek's voice made her skin crawl. We need to talk. You're violating the restraining order by calling me. Just listen. I know your father's been digging into MedSync. I know you think you found something. But if you pursue this, I'll make sure you never see our daughter. Do you understand me? Never? Claire's hand tightened on the phone. You are threatening me. I'm promising you. Drop the investigation, agree to joint custody, and we can both move on. Keep pushing, and I'll bury you. The line went dead. Claire set down the phone, her whole body shaking. He knows, she said. He knows about the investigation. William's expression was stone. Then we move faster. That night, Rebecca filed a formal complaint with the FBI. By noon the next day, federal agents arrived at MedSync headquarters with warrants. Claire watched the news coverage from her parents' living room. 12 FBI agents entering the building, boxes of documents being carried out, employees standing in the parking lot, looking shell-shocked. Derek was let out in handcuffs for processing. The reporter clarified. He was released 3 hours later on $500,000 bail. But the damage was done by noon. By evening, every major news outlet was running the story. Tech CEO Derek Ashford, who made headlines last month after assaulting his pregnant wife, now faces federal charges related to patient data breaches and HIPAA violations. Prosecutors say up to 2.3 million patient records may have been compromised. The company's board has voted to remove Ashford as CEO effective immediately. Claire should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt exhausted. Because even as Derek's empire crumbled, the custody battle was still looming. Even as federal charges piled up, he still had lawyers, still had money, still had rights. That night, Claire went into labor. 3 weeks early, the contractions started around midnight, sharp and urgent. Grace drove her to Whitmore Medical Center while William called ahead to prepare the obstetrics team. In the delivery room, surrounded by machines and monitors and worried faces, Claire gripped the bed rails and tried to breathe through the pain. Dr. Robert Matthews checked the monitors. Baby's heart rate is dropping. We need to move to emergency C-section. Everything happened fast after that. Bright lights, cold air, the smell of antiseptic. William in scrubs beside her, holding her hand. Stay with me, sweetheart, he said. Just stay with me. Dad, Claire gasped. Don't let him take her. Promise me. I promise. Then the world blurred. When she woke, groggy from anesthesia, Grace was beside her. She's here, Grace whispered, tears streaming down her face. She's beautiful and she's healthy and she's here. They brought the baby to her, 5 pounds, 2 ounces, tiny and perfect and alive. Claire held her daughter for the first time and felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly, but purpose. Lily, she whispered. Lily rose. While William leaned over, looking at his granddaughter with wonder. Your mother fought for you, he said softly to the baby. Now we're going to make sure you're safe. But even in that moment of profound joy, Claire knew the fight wasn't over. Derek was still out there, and in 72 hours, they'd face each other in court. The courtroom smelled like old wood and anxiety. Claire sat at the plaintiff's table, Rebecca beside her. Behind them, William and Grace in the gallery. The room was packed with reporters, advocates, and curious onlookers. Across the aisle, too, Derek sat with his new attorney. He looked thinner than she remembered. Tired, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. Judge Patricia Winters entered, and everyone rose. "Please be seated," the judge said. "We're here today for the emergency custody hearing in the matter of Ashford versus Ashford. This is regarding parental rights and custody arrangements for the minor child, Lily Rose Ashford, born 3 weeks ago." Rebecca stood. "Your Honor, we're requesting full custody be granted to Mrs. Claire Bennett with supervised visitation only for Mr. Derek Ashford, based on documented domestic violence, ongoing federal criminal charges, and demonstrated pattern of abusive behavior." Derek's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client has completed an intensive therapy program, has shown genuine remorse, and poses no danger to his child. We're requesting joint custody with equal parenting time." The judge looked at both attorneys. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings. This is going to be a long hearing. Let's begin with witness testimony." The prosecution called Dr. Helen Crawford first. She described in clinical detail what she witnessed at the clinic, the escalating anger, the physical assault, the way Derek showed no concern for Claire's injuries afterward. "In my 15 years as a practicing physician, I've never seen anything quite that callous," Dr. Crawford said. "He stood over her while she was bleeding on the floor and told me she was being dramatic." Derek's attorney tried to soften the testimony. "Dr. Crawford, you can't speak to what was in my client's mind at that moment, can you?" "No, but I can speak to his actions. And his actions were those of a man who felt entitled to hurt someone weaker than him." Next, Rebecca called Sarah Mitchell. Sarah testified about the data breaches, the offshore accounts, the systematic violation of patient privacy laws. "Mr. Ashford knew exactly what he was doing," Sarah said. "He personally approved the data sharing protocols. When I raised concerns, he told me that ethics were for people who couldn't afford lawyers." Derek's attorney objected. "Your Honor, my client's business practices, however questionable, have no bearing on his fitness as a father." Judge Winters looked skeptical. "They speak to character. Counselor, I'll allow it." The testimony continued for hours. Police officers, hospital staff, character witnesses. Then Derek's attorney called his witnesses. A therapist who testified that Derek had made significant progress in anger management. A business associate who called him generous and kind. His mother, who cried on the stand and said her son was a good man who made one terrible mistake. Claire watched it all, feeling like she was floating outside her body. Then Derek took the stand. He looked directly at the judge, his expression earnest. "Your Honor, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm innocent. I did something unforgivable. I hurt the woman I love while she was carrying our child. That's something I have to live with every day." His voice cracked slightly. "But I'm trying to be better. I've been in therapy 5 days a week. I've donated $5 million to domestic violence programs. I stepped down from my company to focus on being a good father." He glanced at Claire. "I know Claire is scared. I understand why. But I love my daughter, and I'm asking for the chance to prove I can be the father she deserves." Rebecca cross-examined him. "Mr. Ashford, you say you love your daughter. Did you love your wife when you hit her?" Yes, I did. I still do. And yet you struck her hard enough to knock her to the ground while she was 8 months pregnant." It was a moment of I wasn't thinking clearly. "How long did it take you to apologize after you hit her?" Derek hesitated. "I don't remember exactly." "You don't remember. Let me refresh your memory. You didn't apologize. You left the clinic and went to your office. You didn't check if she was okay. You didn't call her. You didn't show remorse until after the video went viral." "Correct. I was in shock." "You were in shock. Is that also why you threatened Mrs. Ashford over the phone last week, telling her you'd make sure she never saw her daughter if she didn't drop the federal investigation?" Derek's attorney jumped up. "Objection. There's no proof of that call." Rebecca pulled out a document. "Actually, Mrs. Ashford's phone records show a call from a burner phone purchased at a store near Mr. Ashford's residence. And we have testimony from a MedSync security guard who saw Mr. Ashford purchase that phone the day before the call. The courtroom buzzed. Judge Winters raised her hand for silence. I'll allow it. Continue, Ms. Stone. Rebecca turned back to Derek. You threatened to take her child away if she pursued criminal charges against you. Is that your idea of rehabilitation? Derek's composure cracked. She's trying to destroy me. Her father's trying to destroy me. They're using that baby as a weapon. No further questions, Rebecca said. Returning to her seat, the judge called for a 15-minute recess. Claire stood on shaky legs and walked to the courthouse bathroom. She locked herself in a stall and tried to breathe. Someone entered the bathroom. Footsteps. Then Grace's voice. Sweetheart, you okay? Claire unlocked the stall. I don't know. He's convincing. What if she believes him? She won't, Grace said firmly. She's seen the evidence. But Claire wasn't sure. When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Winters looked at both parties. I've heard enough testimony. I'll deliver my ruling now. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. This has been one of the more disturbing cases I've presided over, the judge began. Not because of the violence itself, though that was certainly appalling, but because of the calculated manipulation that followed. She looked at Derek. Mr. Ashford, I do not doubt that you've attended therapy. I do not doubt that you've donated money. What I doubt is your sincerity. Derek started to speak, but she held up a hand. The evidence shows a pattern of control and abuse that predates the assault. The threatening phone call demonstrates that your rehabilitation is performative, and your federal criminal charges have raised serious questions about your judgment and character. She turned to Claire. Mrs. Bennett has demonstrated stability, appropriate concern for her child's welfare, and courage in the face of significant adversity. Judge Winters folded her hands. I hereby grant full legal and physical custody of Lily Rose Ashford to Claire Bennett. Mr. Ashford is prohibited from any contact with the child or the mother pending resolution of federal criminal proceedings. Derek shot to his feet. Sit down, Mr. Ashford, the judge said sharply. One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. Derek's attorney put a hand on his arm, forcing him back into his chair. Supervised visitation may be reconsidered in the future, pending Mr. Ashford's completion of a genuine treatment program and demonstration of sustained behavioral change. But for now, I find that contact with the defendant would pose a risk to the child's welfare. The gavel came down. Court is adjourned. Claire sat motionless for several seconds. Then Grace was hugging her, and William was there, and Rebecca was squeezing her shoulder. You won, Rebecca said quietly. It's over. But even as relief flooded through her, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't really over. Not yet. 3 months passed. The federal trial against Derek Ashford concluded on a gray November morning. Claire didn't attend. She'd already testified weeks earlier, answering questions about their marriage, his behavior, the assault. She'd done her part. Instead, she stayed home with Lily, watching the baby sleep in her crib, marveling at how much she'd grown already. Grace called from the courthouse. Guilty, she said simply. On all charges. Claire closed her eyes. How long? 4 years federal prison, $12 million in fines. MedSync is being dissolved. Assets sold to compensate victims. 4 years felt like both too much and not enough. William came home that evening with the full details. He's also permanently banned from the healthcare industry, William said, pouring himself a rare glass of whiskey. He'll never work in medical technology again. What about appeals? Claire asked. His lawyer says they'll file, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Claire nodded slowly. It should have felt like victory, and in some ways it did. But mostly it felt like finally being able to exhale after holding her breath for months. That night, she stood by Lily's crib and watched her daughter's tiny chest rise and fall. He's gone, she whispered. You're safe now. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks later. Claire got the house, the one she and Derek had bought together, but he'd insisted be in his name alone. Turned out, marital property laws didn't care whose name was on the deed. She got half of his liquid assets that weren't frozen by federal seizure, enough to be financially secure for years. And most importantly, she got full custody with no visitation rights for Derek. Rebecca walked her through the final paperwork. You can change your name back to Bennett if you want, Rebecca said. Drop the Ashford entirely. Claire thought about it. What about Lily's last name? She's registered as Lily Rose Bennett Ashford. When she's older, she can choose what to do with it. Claire signed the papers. I'll keep Bennett, but I'm done with Ashford. As she left Rebecca's office that day, Claire realized something had shifted. For months, she'd been defined by what Derek had done to her. The victim, the survivor, the woman in the video. But now, walking down the street with the winter sun on her file, she was just Claire. A mother, a daughter, a woman rebuilding her life. The video was still out there. Of course, it would never go away. But it was no longer the only thing that defined her. She enrolled in nursing school that January. It felt right when medicine had always been part of her life through her father. And after everything she'd been through with doctors and hospitals, she wanted to be on that side of healing. The classes were hard. Balancing schoolwork with a baby was harder. But Grace helped with childcare. William covered tuition. And Claire discovered she was stronger than she'd ever known. One day, about 6 months after the trial, she was at the grocery store with Lily in the cart. A woman approached her hesitantly. Are you Claire Bennett? The woman asked. Claire's instinct was to say no, to protect her privacy, but something in the woman's eyes made her pause. Yes, Claire said. I saw your video, the woman said quietly. The one from the clinic. I'm sorry that happened to you. Thank you, Claire said, moving to walk away. Wait, the woman touched her arm gently. I just wanted you to know. I left my husband because of you. I saw what you did, how you fought back, how you didn't let him win. And I thought, if she can do it, maybe I can too. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. Are you safe now? The woman nodded. I'm in a shelter. It's not much, but it's mine, and he can't hurt me there. They stood there in the cereal aisle, two strangers connected by pain and survival. I'm proud of you, Claire said. That takes so much courage. So does what you did, the woman replied. After she left, Claire stood there for a long moment, Lily babbling happily in the cart. She'd never wanted to be a symbol, never wanted to be the face of domestic violence survival. But if her story helped even one person find the courage to leave, then maybe all the pain had meaning. She thought about that moment often in the months that followed, on days when school was hard and she was exhausted and Lily was teething and crying all night. On days when she saw Derek's name in the news appeals denied, parole hearings scheduled. On days when the weight of everything felt too heavy. She remembered the woman in the grocery store, and she kept going. 1 year after the assault, Claire stood in front of a room full of people and told her story. It was the launch event for the Hope Foundation, a nonprofit organization she'd helped create with her father's support. The foundation provided 3 critical services: free legal aid for domestic violence survivors, evidence documentation training for healthcare workers, and emergency financial support for people trying to leave abusive relationships. The name had been Lily's idea. Sort of. Grace had been holding the baby one day and said, "She's such a little hope," and the name stuck. Now Claire looked out at the crowd. Lawyers, doctors, social workers, survivors, advocates. A year ago, she began, I was on the floor of a dental clinic, bleeding and terrified. I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Her voice was steady. She'd practiced this speech 100 times. But what I learned in the months that followed is that the system doesn't protect you just because you're right. It protects you when you have evidence, resources, and people who refuse to let you disappear. She paused, making eye contact with individuals in the crowd. I was lucky. I had a father who owned hospitals. I had money for lawyers. I had a video that proved what happened. But not everyone has those things, and that's not fair. Someone in the audience nodded. The Hope Foundation exists to level the playing field. We provide the resources that help me survive. Free legal representation, emergency housing funds, medical documentation of injuries, support groups, job training. She took a breath. Because the truth is, leaving an abusive relationship is just the beginning. Rebuilding your life is the hard part. And no one should have to do that alone. The applause was loud and sustained. Afterward, people approached her one by one. A young woman who just left her husband last week. A doctor who wanted to train his staff on recognizing abuse. A lawyer offering pro bono services. A reporter wanting to write about the foundation. Claire spoke to them all, Lily on her hip, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose that night. After everyone had left and the event space was empty, William found her sitting alone in a chair. "You did good today," he said, sitting beside her. "Did I?" Claire asked. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm helping or just, I don't know, using my pain for attention." "You're helping," William said firmly. "Do you know how many people reached out today? 73. 73 people who need assistance. And now they'll get it because of what you built." Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. "I never wanted to be the woman from the video." "You're not. You're the woman who survived. There's a difference." Claire thought about that. "People keep asking if I've forgiven him. Have you time?" "No," Claire said honestly. "I don't know if I ever will. Does that make me a bad person?" William shook his head. "It makes you human. Forgiveness isn't required for healing. Sometimes survival is enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. "He's up for parole next year," Claire said quietly. "Did you know that? I heard million. What if they let him out early? Then we deal with it. The restraining order is permanent. He can't come near you or Lily. If he violates it, he goes back to prison. What if he finds a way around it?" William looked at her seriously. "Then I'll make sure he regrets it. But Claire, you can't spend your life looking over your shoulder. He's lost everything, his company, his reputation, his freedom. You won. Don't let him take your peace, too." Claire knew he was right, but fear didn't listen to logic. Still, she was trying. She'd started therapy herself, real therapy, not the court-ordered kind Derek had used as performance. She was learning that trauma doesn't just disappear. It lives in your body, in the way you flinch at sudden movements, in the nightmares, in the hypervigilance. But she was also learning that she could live with it. She could carry the weight of what happened and still build something beautiful. Lily's second birthday party was small and perfect. Just family and a few close friends in Claire's backyard. The little girl ran around in a pink dress, laughing as she chased bubbles that Grace was blowing. Claire stood by the grill with William, watching her daughter play. "She looks like you at that age," William said. "She has Derek's eyes," Claire replied. It was the first time she'd acknowledged that out loud. For so long, she'd tried to pretend Lily was only hers, that Derek had no part in her. But the truth was more complicated. Lily was half him, and Claire was learning to make peace with that. "Does it bother you?" William asked gently. "Sometimes," Claire admitted. "When she makes certain expressions, when she laughs a certain way, I see him, and for a second I'm back in that clinic. And then I remember that she's not him, she's herself, and she'll grow up knowing she's loved and safe and valued. Everything I tried to give myself in that marriage and couldn't." The doorbell rang. Grace went to answer it and returned looking confused. "Claire, there's someone here to see you. She says her name is Jennifer." Claire frowned. She didn't know any Jennifer, but when she went to the door, she recognized the woman immediately. Jennifer Cole, Derek's former mistress, the woman who'd testified against him in trial. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Jennifer said quickly. "I won't stay. I just wanted to give you this." She held out an envelope. Claire took it hesitantly. "What is it?" "A letter. From Derek. He asked me to deliver it." Claire's blood ran cold at the, "You're still in contact with him?" "No, God, no. He sent it to my old address. I almost threw it away, but then I thought, I don't know. I thought you should decide what to do with it." Claire stared at the envelope like it might bite. "I don't want to read anything from him," she said. "I understand. Burn it if you want. But I just felt like you should have the choice." Jennifer turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For my part in everything, I knew he was married. I didn't know about the above, but I knew he was lying to you about him, and I didn't care. That makes me complicit." Claire studied her. Jennifer looked older than in the trial photos. Tired. "Why did you testify against him?" Claire asked. "Because I watched that video and realized he would have done the same thing to me eventually. Men who hurt their wives don't suddenly become good boyfriends. They just find new victims." She met Claire's eyes. "I have a daughter now, And I look at her and think, what if someday a man treats her the way Derek treated you? What if someone knows and doesn't speak up? I couldn't live with that. After Jennifer left, Claire stood on the porch holding the envelope. Grace appeared beside her. What are you going to do with it? I don't know. That night, after Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, Claire sat at her kitchen table and opened the letter. Derek's handwriting was still familiar. Neat. Controlled. Claire, Mom, I know you don't owe me anything. Not forgiveness, not understanding, nothing. But I'm writing this because my therapist says I need to take responsibility without expecting anything in return. What I did to you was unforgivable. I hurt you in ways I'm only beginning to understand. I took your trust, your safety, your sense of self, and I shattered them because I was too broken to see my own damage. I spent 2 years blaming you, blaming stress, blaming circumstances. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I was raised by a father who controlled my mother through fear. I watched her diminish herself to keep peace, and I swore I'd never be like him. Instead, I became exactly like him. I don't expect you to care about my childhood. I don't expect sympathy. I just want you to know that I understand now what I couldn't see. Then you deserve better than me. You deserve someone who saw your strength and celebrated it instead of trying to break it. Our daughter deserves better too. I'm not asking to see her. I know that's not my right. I've lost that privilege. But please, when she's old enough to ask about me, tell her the truth, not a sanitized version. The real truth. Tell her I was a man who hurt her mother. Tell her I went to prison for it. Tell her that loving someone doesn't excuse violence. And tell her that her mother is the strongest person I ever knew. I hope you're happy. Claire, I genuinely do. You survived me. That's its own kind of victory. Derek, Claire read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in a box in her closet. Not to cherish, not to forgive, but to remember. To remember that people are complicated, that abusers aren't monsters from fairy tales. They're humans who make choices. And Derek had made his choices, just as she was making hers now. The next morning, Claire took Lily to the park. They fed ducks at the pond, played on the swings, ate ice cream that melted faster than Lily could lick it. And Claire thought about the question people ask most often. Do you regret marrying him? The honest answer was complicated. She regretted the pain, the fear, the years spent walking on eggshells, but she didn't regret Lily. And she didn't regret learning that she was capable of surviving things she never thought she could. Mama, push, Lily called from the swing. Claire pushed her higher, watching her daughter's face light up with joy. This was the victory, not the courtroom ruling, not the foundation, not even Derek's imprisonment. This moment, this child, this life she'd rebuilt from ashes. Higher, Lily squealed. Claire pushed higher, laughing. And for the first time in 2 years, she felt something close to peace. 4 years later, Claire stood at the podium of a conference hall filled with 500 people, the National Domestic Violence Awareness Conference. She was the keynote speaker. Lily, now 6 years old, sat in the front row with Grace and William. She wore a purple dress and clutched a stuffed rabbit. Claire took a breath and began, My name is Claire Bennett, and 4 years ago, a man hit me in a dental clinic while I was 8 months pregnant. That moment was captured on video and watched by millions of people. The room was silent. For a long time, that video defined me. I was the woman who got hit, the victim, the survivor, the cautionary tale. She paused. But today, I want to talk about what happened after the camera stopped rolling, because that's the part that doesn't go viral, the part that doesn't make headlines. She clicked to the first slide, a photo of the Hope Foundation's first office. This is where we started. One small office, 3 staff members, a shoestring budget. We helped 27 people in our first year. Next slide, a larger building. Last year, we helped 847 survivors obtain legal protection, emergency housing, and financial independence. We trained 4,000 healthcare workers to recognize and document abuse. We placed 312 people in safe jobs with supportive employers. The numbers were staggering even to her. But the work isn't about numbers. It's about people. She clicked to a photo of a woman she'd met at a support group. This is Maria. She left her husband with nothing but the clothes on her back and her 2 children. The Hope Foundation gave her emergency funds, connected her with a pro bono lawyer, and helped her find a job. Today, she's an accountant. Her kids are thriving. She's safe. Down. More photos, more stories. A woman who'd been strangled and left for dead. Now a nurse. A man who'd been abused by his partner. Now running his own business. A teenager who'd escaped her abusive parents. Now in college. Every one of these people deserves to be celebrated, Claire said, because leaving is the hardest thing you'll ever do, and surviving is even harder. She looked directly at the audience. People ask me all the time if I've forgiven my ex-husband. The answer is no. I haven't. Maybe I never will. A few people shifted uncomfortably. But here's what I've learned. Forgiveness isn't required for healing. Peace doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. She paused. What it means is choosing, every single day, to build something better than what was destroyed. The screen changed to show Lily, laughing on a playground. This is my daughter. She's 6. She loves dinosaurs, dance class, and her grandfather's hospital where she wants to be a doctor someday. Claire smiled. She asks about her father sometimes, and I tell her the truth, that he made very bad choices, that he hurt people, including me, that he's in prison because of those choices. But I also tell her that she is not responsible for his actions, that she gets to decide who she becomes, that love should never hurt, and that she is safe, valued, and cherished exactly as she is. The audience was rapt. If you're here today because you're trying to leave an abusive relationship, and I want you to hear this, it's not your fault. You are not weak. You are not stupid. You are surviving, and when you're ready, there are people who will help you fight. She leaned forward slightly. If you're here because you're already out but struggling to rebuild, I want you to know it gets better. Not all at once, not in a straight line, but slowly, day by day, you will find yourself again, and she will be stronger than you ever imagined. And if you're here because you work in this field, helping survivors every day, I want to say thank you. You are the reason people like me are still alive. You are the reason families stay intact. You are the reason hope exists. The applause started quietly, then grew. Claire looked down at Lily, who was clapping enthusiastically, even though she probably didn't understand half of what had been said. After the speech, people lined up to talk to her, survivors sharing their stories, professionals asking about the Hope Foundation's training programs, donors offering support. It took 2 hours to speak to everyone. Finally, Mom, Claire, William, Grace, and Lily walked out into the evening air. You hungry, tosh little bug? Claire asked Lily. Ice cream, Lily announced. We just had lunch. Ice cream for lunch, William laughed. I think ice cream sounds perfect. They found a small shop nearby. Lily got chocolate. Claire got vanilla. They sat outside in the warm sunshine. Mama, why were all those people clapping? Lily asked. Claire thought about how to answer. Because I told them a story about being brave, she said finally. Were you scared? Very scared. But you did it anyway. Claire smiled. Yes, I did it anyway. Lily nodded seriously. That's what brave means. Miss Thompson said so. Miss Thompson is very smart. They finished their ice cream in comfortable silence. That night, after Lily was asleep, Claire sat on her back porch with a cup of tea. The stars were bright, the air was cool, everything was quiet. She thought about the letter Derek had written, still in the box in her closet. She thought about the woman in the grocery store who'd said Claire's story helped her leave. She thought about the 847 people the Hope Foundation had helped. She thought about Lily, sleeping peacefully upstairs, safe and loved. And she realized something. She'd spent so much time trying to move past what happened, trying to forget, trying to erase. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was to carry it, to let it be part of her story without letting it be the whole story. To say, yes, this terrible thing happened. And yes, I survived. And yes, I'm building something beautiful from the wreckage. The next morning, Claire dropped Lily at school and drove to the cemetery. She hadn't been there in years. She found the small memorial stone, not a grave. Derek wasn't dead, but a marker nonetheless. For the woman she'd been before, the Claire who'd believed love meant sacrifice, who'd excused controlling behavior as caring, who'd stayed silent to keep peace. That Claire was gone. What remained was someone different, someone harder but kinder, someone who knew the difference between love and control, someone who'd learned that survival was its own form of victory. Claire placed a small bouquet of flowers by the stone. "Thank you," she whispered, "for getting us out." Then she walked back to her car, started the engine, and drove toward the rest of her life. The sun was bright, the road was clear, and for the first time in 4 years, Claire Bennett felt something she'd almost forgotten. Joy, not happiness. That was too simple. But joy, the kind that exists alongside pain, the kind that knows darkness but chooses light anyway. She turned on the radio. A song she didn't recognize filled the car, and she sang along anyway, her voice strong and sure, because she was alive, she was free, and she was enough. Epilogue: 10 years after the assault, Claire received a letter, not from Derek, from the parole board. He'd been released 3 years earlier on good behavior. The restraining order was still in effect. He'd never tried to contact her or Lily, but the letter explained that he'd requested permission to send a message through official channels. Claire sat in her office at the Hope Foundation headquarters and stared at the envelope. Lily, now 14, was at school, thriving, happy, strong. She knew about her father, knew what he'd done, and she'd made her choice about whether to have contact with him when she turned 13. Her answer had been no. "Maybe someday," Lily had said, "but not yet. I'm not ready." Claire had supported that decision completely. Now she opened the letter from the parole board. Derek's message was brief. "I saw the article about the Hope Foundation's 10th anniversary. You've helped over 6,000 people. I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, but I am. I hope Lily is well. I think about her every day. I don't expect anything from either of you. I just wanted you to know that the work you're doing matters. It would have saved people like me if it had existed sooner. Maybe it'll prevent someone else from becoming what I became. That's worth something. Take care of yourself. Claire Shaw, you deserve every good thing." Claire read it once, then she placed it in a file marked correspondence and closed the drawer. She didn't need his validation. She didn't need his pride. She'd built this life without him, despite him, and it was hers. That evening, she picked up Lily from volleyball practice. "How was your day?" Claire asked. Lily launched into a detailed explanation of a drama between two of her teammates and a disagreement about who should be team captain. Claire listened, smiling. Her daughter was so confident, so sure of herself, so willing to speak up when something wasn't right. Everything Claire had fought to become, Lily already was. They stopped at a bookstore on the way home. Lily wanted the new fantasy novel everyone at school was reading. As they browsed, a young woman approached Claire hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Claire Bennett from the Hope Foundation?" Claire nodded, the woman's eyes filled with tears. "You probably won't remember me, but 5 years ago, I called your hotline. I was in a hotel bathroom hiding from my boyfriend. I didn't know what to do. The woman who answered stayed on the phone with me for 3 hours. She helped me make a plan, helped me get to a shelter. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm safe now. I'm happy now. And it's because of people like you." Claire took her hand. "I'm so glad you're safe. Truly." After the woman left, Lily looked at her mother. "That happens a lot, doesn't it? People thanking you, Tama, sometimes to house. Does it ever feel weird?" Claire thought about it. "A little. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it needed to be done." Lily nodded. "That's what real heroes do, right? They just do what needs to be done." Claire laughed softly. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart." "Yes, you are," Lily said seriously. "You survived something terrible and you turned it into something good. That's literally the definition of a hero." Claire pulled her daughter into a hug. "You're pretty wise for 14. I learned it from the best." That night, Claire tucked Lily in, even though she was probably too old for it. "Mom, I'm not 5, Lily protested, but she was smiling. "Humor me." Claire sat on the edge of the bed. "Can I ask you something?" Lily said. "Always. Do you ever wish I didn't exist, like, if I didn't exist, you wouldn't have that connection to him?" Claire's heart broke a little. Never, she said firmly. Not once. Not ever. You are the best thing that ever happened to be. The absolute best thing, baby. Even though, even though, no qualifiers, no conditions. You are wanted and loved and cherished. Always. Lily's eyes got a little watery. Thanks, Mom. Thank you for being my daughter. After Lily fell asleep, Claire walked through her house. It was small but comfortable, filled with photos and books and Lily's art projects covering the refrigerator. It was nothing like the penthouse she'd lived in with Derek. It was infinitely better. She stepped out onto the back porch and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Derek was living his life, presumably trying to rebuild. And she hoped, genuinely, that he'd found peace, not for his sake, but because the world had enough pain without adding more. But his peace wasn't her responsibility. Her responsibility was to this life, this home, this daughter, this work. And she was doing it. Every single day, she was doing it. The next morning, Claire woke early and went for a run. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her feet hit the pavement in a steady rhythm. She thought about the question people ask most often. What would you tell your younger self? For years, she didn't have an answer, but now she did. She would tell that young woman in the dental clinic, you will survive this. It will be the hardest thing you ever do. You will question everything. You will doubt yourself. You will be scared and angry and broken, but you will survive. And on the other side of this pain, there's a life waiting, a beautiful, messy, imperfect life. There's a daughter who will call you her hero. There's work that will give your pain purpose. There's peace that you earned with every breath you took when breathing felt impossible. You will survive this, and you will thrive. Claire ran faster, her breath coming hard but steady. The sun climbed higher. The world woke up around her, and Claire Bennett ran toward everything she'd built, everything she'd become, everything she still wanted to be. She ran toward hope, and she didn't look back. Derek Ashford served 4 years in federal prison and was released on parole. He currently works in construction under supervision and has not violated the restraining order. Claire Bennett earned her nursing degree and continues to run the Hope Foundation, which has helped over 6,000 domestic violence survivors in the past 10 years. Lily Rose Bennett is 14 years old. She's captain of her volleyball team, loves marine biology, and wants to be a doctor like her grandfather. She has never met her biological father and has chosen not to pursue contact at this time. The Hope Foundation continues to grow, offering services in 12 states and advocating for stronger protections for domestic violence survivors nationwide. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out. You are not alone. You are not weak. You deserve safety and peace. National Domestic Violence Hotline. Walk on 800-799-7233. Statistics. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence. On average, it takes victims 7 attempts to leave before succeeding permanently. Economic abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. With proper support, survivors can and do rebuild their lives. Your story doesn't end with abuse. It begins when you choose to survive.